Hey guys, welcome back to the homestead. So today I'm going to put together my chicken noodle soup to can up, but I also wanted to can and preserve some egg noodles to go with it. So this is a very basic egg noodle to start with. Now I do not can my noodles with my soup for a couple reasons. One, they just get too squishy. You can if you want to rebel can them, but honestly, I find, especially for the fresh ones, they hold up so much better if you just let them dry and then add them in when you heat your soup up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our flour and we're going to make a well. And this recipe is super, super easy. So what you actually do, if you want to know how many people that you're going to be feeding, a good measurement for rule on this one is 3.5 ounces of flour and 1 egg per person. So I'm making a serving for 4 because I want to put some on the shelf. So that way when we pull the pints down that I'm going to make later, I have noodles ready to go that don't have any extras and junk in them. So you're just going to kind of take this and kind of stir it in. And I stir the flour in with a fork until I get a nice consistency that I'm not kind of just sticking my hands in egg yolk, which being a texture person, it's kind of weird. But you see, I just start to work that flour into that egg and then just kind of keep working it down from a shaggy dough until eventually a smooth dough. Now, when I'm going to make the egg noodles at the same time that I actually make the soup, if I'm not canning it, your egg noodles, once you get them all put together, have to rest for 30 minutes. So once you put this in a ball and wrap it in plastic, and again, you just wrap it in the plastic wrap to keep the dough from drying out before you actually get to work it. But make sure you time it to know that it's going to take you about 45 minutes from start to finish on this to have fresh egg noodles if you're going to throw them together at that time. And you see here, I'm just kneading this dough down, and depending on how shaggy it started out, it's usually anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes that you're going to knead this until it gets that smooth consistency that you want for pasta dough. I think this one took me about 10 minutes to work it all together. I do find it funny as I do these close up on my hands, and I realize I do have my mother's hands. So I'm going to have to think on that. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just I remember my mother's hands when she was in her 40s, and now I have those hands. And I guess that's just a sign of the times. So we're just going to roll this up into a ball, working in those last little bits of shagginess. And then once I roll this up into a little ball, I'm going to wrap it in cellophane because, like I said, it's going to have to sit for about a half hour. That way it rests a little bit before you start working it into your noodles, so you don't want your dough to dry out before you get there. So now I'm going to start prepping my chicken noodle soup. Again, all organic items. I had about 8 chickens that I needed to work through in my freezer to get ready for this year's crop. That's about what I had left over. And so I might be sick of chicken by the time this run is over, but I'm running out the last of my chicken stock, and I'm running out the last of my chickens in the freezer. And so I've got a couple things on the menu. And these chickens I actually roasted before I put this together. So you just roast them in the oven like you normally do. If you don't want to roast them, then you can kind of cook them however you want. If you have a rotisserie, if you want to grill it out even and put that flavor into your chicken noodle, you can do that as well. And then I'm just adding a very basic celery, carrot, onion, the trifecta of a soup. And I'm just going to put those into it. And again, prepping everything cold right now. I've got my broth sitting on the stove at like a simmer, not a boil. So it's heating up. And I do my celery in larger chunks because to actually eat celery, not a fan of it, but I like the taste of that celery. As to where everybody else in my family actually likes to eat celery, so I can't just use celery seed for flavor. And the chickens actually enjoy it when I make the chicken noodle soup because they get lots of yummy scraps. And I left, when I chopped up the carrots, I left a little thickness to them because, again, like as they can, all right, they're going to get a softness to them. If you wanted to and you wanted that vegetable taste, but you didn't want to add vegetables to it and you just wanted to can the chicken and the broth together, then you could do that and add your carrots and onions and celery later. And sometimes I'll even do like a half and half, like half chicken, half vegetable. So that way I get the flavor in there that I want. And then if I wanted to add a firmer vegetable later, then I could. So there's many options that you can do to this. And again, if you can't eat chicken, I've actually taken this recipe and tweaked it, swapping out the egg noodles for like a barley and doing a beef with the beef stock. And so there's many different things that you can do just to get a nice complex soup sitting on your shelf that takes a little while to prep in the long run, but you end up with about 8 or 9 meals sitting on the shelf when you're done, which is kind of nice. Especially considering winter does not want to give up and we're back in the 50s again today. So I'm actually prepping extra because this is going to be part of dinner tonight. And there's probably 1,000 different ways that I could prep my vegetables to make it, well, faster. But kind of for me, it's more entertaining to just kind of sit there and chop it out because I work through a lot of stuff. I actually have to make 6 loaves of soap this afternoon as well. And so, in making that soap, I'm kind of thinking through the different textures and the patterns and everything else I have to do this week. And so, when you're prepping these things, I personally find that it's nicer and I can kind of work through all the stuff that's in my head while I'm also making meals for later when I'm just too tired to actually put something together. But then I'm not, running to the nearest fast food joint, which I mean, I'm not judging anybody. I've definitely been guilty of that one in the past. And really, it just came down to I didn't have a lot of time to prep or plan or put something together. And usually, especially with the kids and work and everything else, some days it just doesn't come together. And so you end up at like a Subway or a Jimmy John's or whatever your preference is. The good thing about this is having this and putting the time in now. Well, when those days hit, well, we know we can literally just walk over to our shelf and we can grab something that we put together and we know what's in there and we know it's good for us and we don't fall back into bad habits. And believe me, I'm talking to myself more than anybody else because convenience has, well, made life convenient to where you just kind of walk away and you do those things. So now I'm just kind of deboning the chicken, if you will. I'm going to save those carcasses because, like I said, I want to take those. Well, like I said, I have those 8 chickens that I'm trying to work through in my freezer, and I want to take those bones and I want to turn them into bone broth later. So right now I'm just collecting them in a Ziploc bag until I work through all 8 of them, and then all 8 of them will go in to make broth later. I do find that this recipe holds up better if you cook your chicken before you make your soup. This is not one that I would put raw chicken in and try. I don't know. It doesn't, the chicken doesn't, it just doesn't act right in the soup, if that makes sense. It kind of clumps together and makes that weird, slimy chicken kind of consistency if you've ever canned raw chicken. So I do find that cooking the chicken beforehand kind of helps with that. And we're just gonna kind of chunk it down. I don't put the skin in here, but I'm also not super, super, super ridiculous about it either. So if some skin does end up in there, it's not the end of the world. And I pretty much use one whole chicken for this recipe, and you'll actually find when we get to the end that it is heavier on broth, but that's because we're going to be adding noodles to it later, right? So it kind of looks like we've done a half can, but then we have to remember that we're going to be adding noodles, and if you don't want to add noodles, you can add rice later, make chicken and rice soup. So there's a bunch of different things you can do. I mean, barley would even work with it too if you want chicken and barley, but I prefer barley with beef. It's just my brain. So now we're just going to add this to the stock pot with 2 bay leaves and our spices. And then we're going to let that cook probably for about 20-30 minutes to kind of marinate all the flavors together. In this time, our dough has rested completely. And so we're just going to take and chop our dough into sections. I can usually get about 4 sections out of it if you roll it into a nice little ball. And you want to kind of roll it out as flat as you can. Now, if you're going to manually cut your noodles, which you can do, you're going to want to roll it out as thin as you possibly can to make sure that those noodles dry completely. If you're throwing them in tonight's dinner, well, you don't have to worry about it as much. They're just going to take a little longer to cook. But then it would be more like a dumpling instead of a noodle. So try to get your noodles as thin as you possibly can if you don't have the pasta maker. And honestly, that pasta maker is the heat. I got it off Amazon, I think, and it was like $40. But after you kind of get the hang of it, you can really whip through some noodles pretty quick. Sometimes I make my dough ridiculously long and I have to cut it before I hang that on the drying rack. But again, it's your kitchen, do what you want in it. Now, if you don't want to dry your noodles, but you still want to put noodles up, at this point you could kind of make them into little bird's nests and sit them on a baking pan and then stick them in the freezer until they freeze completely, and then put them in bags like little bird's nests that you could come back later and cook them from that consistency as well too. So if you don't want to dry them and you have the freezer space, well, then you can freeze these noodles. They hold very well in the freezer as well. So again, lots of different options to be able to put noodles away. So we're not buying the ones off the shelf with the enriched items in them. I know that you can find some noodles out there that don't have all the preservatives and stuff in them. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's so much cheaper to make them yourselves if you just invest the time in it now for a later dinner. And honestly, if you have time, like usually on Sundays, I have a lot more time to prep dinner, so my noodles are fresh going into my soup than I would like on a Thursday afternoon after work. So here I got a little bit smarter and I decided to cut the dough before I ran it through the noodle cutter. And so this little contraption from Amazon, like I said, it's kind of nice. So you just kind of switch the handle back and forth depending on which side you're using. Like I said, here when you gather your noodles, you would just kind of twist them down into a bird's nest if you were going to freeze them. But because I'm trying to dry them, I'm going to hang them up. And I think I got them as possibly as thin as I possibly could. And I know every dough cutter is a little bit different. This one I started like at the first roll through, it's at the thickest possible just to get it through the machine. And then by the second roll through, I drop it down to not the thinnest, but the second thinnest option that's available. So just kind of play with whatever dough cutter you have. Now, if you don't have that, they do have the Amish one, which is kind of fun too, which is almost like a rolling pin that you can actually lay your dough out and cut it into strips too, which I used to use that one a lot when we lived in Pennsylvania. I actually find this kind of fun to do these noodles. I get a little tickled with myself with pasta because it was one of those that took me forever to try to figure out, and that's why I shared my easy egg noodle recipe, because egg noodles are so versatile that you can use them in so many different things. Now, of course, if you have an egg allergy, you're going to want to swap out with something else. But the other, that ravioli recipe, that one works nice too. And once they've completely dried, what I do is I put them down in my mason jar, and I actually have a vacuum sealer that attaches an attachment for the mason jar for my vacuum sealer. And so I just vacuum seal it down once they're completely dry, and then they sit on my shelf until I'm ready to use. So it's kind of nice. So my soup has finished kind of marinating together. So we're just going to fill our jars up. And what I do is I use a slotted spoon to try to work through the jars to get as much the goodies kind of spread out between the jars. I mean, if you wanted to, you could probably drain it in a colander into a pot. But if you forget to put your pot into your colander, well, that's never fun. Ask me, I know. Spent a lot of time making a bone broth one time and lost it all to the drain. Things we do when we're not paying attention. Fun. So I just kind of keep working through these until I get them completely filled up. And then we'll come back and we'll add the broth to them. Again, kind of still, it's all in the pot. We're just kind of dividing it out so we don't end up with a jar of broth. I mean, if you do, it's not the end of the world. Because you can drink that on days where you don't feel like eating, right? If you're really sick. I have been known to do that. I actually make extra in it. So, should I need to make things stretch a little more, I have that extra jar of the base in there that I can just kind of throw in with everything else, throw a few extra noodles in or some rice, and lo and behold, brand new different meal. And you're going to want to leave about an inch headspace on these, and don't be fooled. You're still going to need to make sure you take your air bubbles out of this, because even things can get trapped through just the small amount of foods we've put at the bottom. So we want to make sure that we take all our air bubbles out so we don't get the icky sickies later. So like I said, we're just going to take our air bubbles out, and we're going to wipe our rims, and we're going to put our lids on, and we're going to hand tight them down, right? So it's kind of the same process as we've been doing this entire time. That really never changes. If by this point, if you've been canning along and you've had a few buckles, again, it's probably because you're cranking down too tight on those lids. It's almost better to go not enough tight than it is to go too tight. And it's an art. You'll learn it. I do like the setup of this soup because, like I said, there's just so many options that you can do with it, right? You can put noodles, you can put rice, you can put barley. If you wanted to later, you could throw potatoes in with it. It's just a nice base, and I'll put that full recipe below for you guys so you have it. But it really is a crowd favorite around here because you can do so many different things with it. But if you can't eat chicken, you can swap it out, right? Beef for beef broth, and kind of put the same thing on your shelf. Still the same noodles. I mean, I am a fan of a beef soup just as much as I am a chicken soup. Actually, I probably prefer beef over chicken. Um, I don't know why. I just do. But again, we're just going to put these in here, and then we're going to let our canner vent like we normally do for the 10 minutes. Once it gets up to vent phase, and then we'll put our weight on, and we'll wait our 75 minutes for 15 pounds pressure for my area. Again, please make sure you check for your elevation, because if you live at the tip top of the Rocky Mountains, it's going to be quite different than if you live on the beaches of North Carolina. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go through the canning process. And don't stress too much. When I first moved here, well, actually, when I first moved to Pennsylvania from North Carolina, yeah, I might have done 2 batches and forgot you had to add the extra 5 minutes for the elevation. So it happens. We're all human and we make mistakes. So once our time is done, we're just going to set these on the counter again. And they'll set for about 12 to 24 hours once we know that seal is locked down really nicely. I do hope you guys enjoyed this one. Like I said, it's a crowd favorite around here, just to have something on the shelf that you can do so many different things with. I've really kind of enjoyed I've been doing canning for quite some time. Been able to get these recipes actually on video to refer back to is kind of nice as well, because sometimes I like to change my recipes up. But I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you for stopping by the homestead, and I can't wait to see you next time.